there's something about online commentary in particular that really brings that forward. And then you have the other problem, I would say too, which is that in some sense, the online world, and this is the world that the IGN kids are immersed in, it's a faux celebrity world, right? Because everyone online in some sense is a celebrity of different proportions. They have their followers, they have their fans, let's say, and then the whole enterprise seems to facilitate image management. I know I think it's TikTok, there are real-time facial feature adjustment filters so that you can make, girls use them more than boys for obvious reasons. You can make your lips plumper and redder, you can make your eyes bigger, you can anime yourself, you can cutify yourself, to coin a terrible term, and you can do that in real time. And all of much of the reinforcement pressure seems to be directed towards attention seeking, and then that combined with the fact that there are almost no consequences for misbehavior seems to produce a pretty, first of all, a toxic social environment, but also one that doesn't follow the same rules as actual face-to-face contact, which I think is the bigger danger.
Yeah, and I think the online world has followed an interesting trajectory when it comes to attention seeking and narcissism and so on. So the one constant, you're right, the trolls, the ones who are the worst offenders, yeah. Sociopaths, narcissists, clearly, they've shown that in research. But for everybody else, I think early on, social media was something that pulled for that attention seeking, and you got that narcissism there of, look at me, I'm on MySpace and I have this many followers and here's all of my pictures and so on. But then when social media became more mandatory, which is really what it became for IGN around the early 2010s, I mean, when, almost 80%, 85% or so of high school students are doing that every single day on social media. Then, and everybody's participating, well, not everybody can get attention. So then it becomes this competition. So I think at that point became less about narcissism for most people and more about not measuring up. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's right. And that's when you start to get, I have to use these enhancement filters because I don't look as good as everybody else online. And I must be, unattractive because I don't have as many likes and followers as I want to have. And then all of the other things of I'm not interacting with someone face to face. I'm not getting the same emotional connection, and that people are automatically more negative and hostile. I mean, there's so many things going on in that online interaction. Especially once it became mandatory, that pulled not even really for narcissism, but more for anxiety and depression.
Right. So maybe that's part of the reason that you've been picking up these and indicating these increases in mental health symptoms among young people. Well, the other thing I'm wondering about too, I've thought about this to a great degree, is that I studied antisocial behavior in boys and girls. And boys, they're pretty much straightforward juvenile delinquents when they're antisocial. They kick and fight and steal and break rules. And it's a lot of externalizing behavior, right? A lot of acting out. But girls who are antisocial, they use reputation destruction and innuendo and gossip and backbiting, and they can be unbelievably good at it. And everyone knows that. I mean, Mean Girls, that famous movie, was about precisely that. And the thing about social media one of the things about it that's quite interesting and disturbing is that female-type antisocial behavior scales brilliantly online. Because it can be done behind the scenes, it can be done anonymously, it can be done with that derisive contempt, let's say. And the consequences are vanishingly small. And so I can imagine that teenage girls who are often subject to bullying by other girls are now subject to bullying in a way that's much more subtle and much more devious and much more continuous, because that's the other thing that happens to young people now is, can you imagine being a teenager where nothing you ever did would be forgotten?
Right. And it's 24/7. It's always with you, because that's the way they communicate with their friends. That is their lifeline to the world. And so it used to be, maybe you got bullied at school, you could come home and get away from it. And now there's no escape. And it is particularly toxic for girls. I mean, think about Instagram. Instagram at base is a platform where primarily girls and young women post pictures of themselves and ask other people to comment.
Jesus, brutal.
Right? It absolutely is brutal.
Yeah,
And popularity becomes a number, likes and followers, and cyberbullying, all the things that we're talking about, it is a toxic soup.
Well, I remember, we did psychometric analysis and looked at the psychometric analysis of thought patterns that loaded on trait neuroticism. And so, as you know well, but I'll explain to everyone else, trait neuroticism is something like your baseline level of the proclivity to experience negative emotion, like depression and anxiety. And one of the things that's quite striking is that self-conscious thoughts load so heavily on neuroticism, they're almost indistinguishable from emotions. And so it looks like if you're self-conscious, if you're thinking about yourself, you are instantly miserable. And then if you're a teenage, then it gets worse for teenage girls, I think, because we also know that teenage girls experience a spike in neuroticism that's attendant on puberty, and that their self-conscious concerns tend to be particularly body-focused. And that's probably a consequence of the fact that females are evaluated more stringently as a consequence of their appearance, particularly when they're young. I mean, men are evaluated on the basis of their performance, let's say, but women tend to be evaluated more on the basis of their appearance. And so you can see that's a perfect storm for young girls because they hit a negative emotion peak at 13. Now they're susceptible to bullying. They're extremely self-conscious about their bodies. And then the entire online world is a place to display for public. It's like the old nightmare that people have about public speaking is being naked on a stage. That's really, in some real sense, what the social media world has done to teenage girls. It's got to be damn near unbearable.
Yeah, and the consequences have been severe. So teen depression has doubled, and that was true even before the pandemic. The rise started about 2011 or 2012, right as social media moved from optional to mandatory, and right when smartphones were owned by the majority of people. Loneliness went up, anxiety went up, and it's not just symptoms. Self-harm behaviors, so the CDC keeps track of this, emergency room visits for self-harm. So that's an objectively measured behavior, not something subject to any kind of self-report bias. And self-harm among 10 to 14-year-old girls has quadrupled in the last 12 years.